Okay, folks, let's get started. First, let me introduce myself, our team, and the host today. I'm Alexey Kistenev. I'm one of the co-founders of Standuply. It's an application for project management automation on Slack and Microsoft Teams. And we are on the market for 7 years, but we always wanted to be not only the app, but to be a leader in community building around project management, and to help managers all over the world to solve their challenges easier, to help them to become better managers. And that's why we started running these online meetings and webinars. And today we have Jesse Fewell on the call, who is a great coach, author, and trainer. And from what I know, Jesse has written a book that has been translated into 11 languages with almost 500,000 readers. Also today on the call, we have Katerina Shadrin, who is our community and marketing manager. And we need to say thanks to her because he managed to connect with Jesse. She successfully got him on the call, and now we have this webinar ready. So Jesse, it's all yours, and we can get started. But before we get started, I have one question for you. Why do we need to calculate and quantify team's culture?
Okay, that sounds like an invitation. Welcome, everybody. It is good to be here. I am so excited to be here with my new friends from Standuply. They are the sponsors and organizers for our session today to talk about culture. And this is a talk that I've shared with a number of audiences and organizations across the world. And it's a very helpful way to understand what is happening. Like, what is happening in our organization? Why are we not moving in the direction we need to move? Why is there so much disagreement about what transformation should be? And why are they arguing with me about the change that we need to make happen? What is going on? And sometimes it can be really helpful to tell the story with a picture. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So at the end of the day, we're going to be learning some things that will help us drive the culture we want by understanding the culture we have. And this is going to help us whether you are a change agent, whether you are a project manager who's driving change in a tactical sense, or if you're a transformation coach who's looking to drive a cloud transformation, a product transformation, agile transformation, or AI adoption. Whatever the change is, at the end, culture is key. In fact, I know a lot of change champions who complain, Jesse, we would be so much more effective, but our culture is in the way. It's a barrier to driving agility and innovation and collaboration and AI and all the things that we want, but our culture just is in the way. And my answer to that is, actually, the culture is half the job of change. And we're going to spend some time today talking about how do we describe the current state versus the future state. What are the words that we can use? And can we use a visual to tell the picture? And can we measure it with data so that we can satisfy the data people? So here's the agenda. We've got 4 topics. We're going to start first with the cultural challenge. Why is this so hard? Second, we're going to talk about the Competing Values Framework. This is a research-based framework for measuring and visualizing culture. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about country versus company. We're going to talk a little bit about, well, Jesse, you don't understand. I work in Germany. Or you don't understand. I work in India. You are an American. It's totally different for me. Is it? We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to close with a series of examples of how to use the framework to measure misalignment, to measure cultural progress, and to measure the areas where we can making some real insights. So that's what we're going to be talking about, starting first with the culture challenge itself. This is hard. This is hard. So regardless of the change that you're looking to facilitate or drive or enable, there's going to be resistance. The human experience is one about change that we want, change that we're trying to make happen. This would be creating a new career. This would be finding a new life partner, maybe having some children, maybe finding a new home. These are changes that we initiate, we want to change. But then changes that are coming into us, inbound change, maybe a layoff, maybe our political opponents are winning in the elections, maybe there's a disruption in the marketplace. I'm going to resist those changes because I did not initiate them. And so many times people will argue in the office that this agile transformation, this is just a fad. Let's be patient. Let's wait for, this new reorg from the vice president, this is just their way of getting us to do more work. I know it is. This is it. Why? Why are people resisting? What's happening around this? So, two definitions that we can use to describe this cultural dynamic, the behavioral patterns. What are the behavioral patterns in our organization and our teams and our offices? One way to describe it is that culture is just the way we do things. It's just how things are. I know many times we will talk about best practices like collaborating as a committee to choose priorities and focus only on those priorities. And then someone will say, we just don't do that here. Sometimes culture describes the behaviors that we expect and the misbehaviors that we tolerate. For example, we might tolerate people making a lot of mistakes because we're more interested in hard work, hours, and putting in a lot of intensity, even if it means there are some mistakes made at late hours, because we value speed and we value creativity less than we value perfection. Sometimes it's the other way around. So culture is a struggle to understand. It's a struggle according to the research. So this is one study that we used in the book Untapped Agility that we referenced. And there was one survey around a DevOps transformation that found that you can see this, half of the barriers around a DevOps transformation, which is in IT, it's a technology movement around a lot of automation of operations and automation of technology development. And you see there, 43% are about culture and legacy, legacy habits, legacy processes, existing ways things are. And you'd be that's surprising to me. I thought this was unusual that for a technology initiative, half of the barriers are not about the technology at all. Yes, there are around infrastructure, quality, and complexity, but it turns out that there's more to it than that. It's also a struggle even during the pandemic. During the pandemic, the primary themes around the barriers to driving positive change were around culture. Even when there's an emergency, a collective emergency like the pandemic, where we had to innovate, we have to innovate right now. Well, the barriers to innovation include the leadership styles, the wrong kind of mindset, silos, and sponsorship. But culture also got in the way of the transformations we need, the innovations we need. And it's also a common struggle for continuing on a long-term journey as leaders who want to install best practices, as leaders who want to do a upskilling of our talent base, leaders who want to experiment with new initiatives and new innovations. According to the annual State of Agile report, culture is still right there at the top, as well as general resistance to change, as well as unwilling to admit mistakes and learn from failure, as well as not enough collaboration and knowledge sharing. And so you see that just the way things are tends to be a common barrier for the way things should be. And I'm going to share a lot of this from the lens of agile ways of working. It tends to be where I've spent a lot of my time. And so, for example, if I'm driving an agile transformation or driving agile ways of working, again, we've mentioned a number of other kinds of transformations, the patterns are the same. That there are two sides to the change equation. There are two sides to the coin. On the one hand, we need structure. We need methods. We need mechanics. We need those tangible things. But we also need the intangible things, the mindsets, and the culture. So culture, structure, methods, mindsets, the tangible, the intangible, we need both of these. And what universally happens is sometimes, whether you're a project manager, product manager, a agile coach, a project portfolio manager, coach, we emphasize one more than the other. And we need to emphasize both sides of these conversations. Whether many of you would be focusing on, let's install short iterations and sprints. Let's have an embedded product owner. Let's have modern platforms and tools. Let's organize full stack teams. And whatever mechanics, whatever structures, whatever processes or practices you want to champion and install, we should also have an awareness of the relationships that are in place, the language, the words that people are using around our ways of working, the symbols. Maybe a status symbol is how we dress on camera, whether we even have backgrounds on camera, or how do we address growth and improvement? Is growth only about the next promotion? Or maybe there's an emphasis on different areas of advancement and promotion and growth. So whatever you're doing, make sure you have awareness of the environment in which you are doing it. That's what this culture conversation is about. It's not a barrier. It's literally half the job of change. Half the job of change is understanding and shaping the environment to accept the change that we are enabling. Okay, that sounds inspiring. What do I do? I've never really thought of it that way. How do I begin? That's a good question. And we're going to walk through now a framework for measuring culture. And we're going to go through it one step at a time. Step one is a y-axis that describes a spectrum of emphasis between flexible people and focused systems. These are both good things. Sometimes we believe in our people and we want them to be empowered and we want them to be creative. And then sometimes we also want efficient systems of communication. We want efficient systems of planning. And they run a little bit in tension with each other. An overemphasis on flexible people means that maybe our practices are not very focused or aligned. An emphasis on focused systems might mean that there's not as much flexibility for people's choices. This is the y-axis. The x-axis
I normally
would
put
be
cotton ball,
the
but yeah,
tension between the internal present reality, current state, versus the external future opportunity, future state. Both of these are important. It's important to understand who we have, our current relationships, our current capabilities. It's also important to understand where we want to go, what we could achieve, what impact is on the horizon. This is arguably the whole reason of being in a business or in a project or in a community, is to achieve something, to go somewhere. Both of these are important. All four of these are important. And if we start to compare these two axes, we start to see four quadrants. Let's talk about them. On the one hand, if we are emphasizing our people and our future, we're very creative. We want people to do things first. We want them to try new things, new ideas, imagine the future. We want them to take risks. We believe in our people capturing future opportunity. But that usually means breaking some rules, doing the unconventional. It means looking a little bit like we are out of control. We're not terribly safe if we're over there doing lots of new things. We're not predictable. We're not consistent. We're very much reliable, believable, safe. And we call this a controlled environment because it's not out of control. Like those creative people, they're out of control. Look at the way they wear their hair and look at the way they tattoo and they have all their piercings. They're out of control. And then we look at all the people in the control category and look at them all wearing the same suit and they eat the same food and they're all very predictable and reliable and understandable. And so you can see that some environments require both of these. An art gallery wants creativity. A finance department wants some control. I want my bank to be very under control, and I want my musicians to be very creative. It's about a blend of the right environment, of the right values in the right environment. Likewise, if we believe in our people, flexible people around the current state of our internal reality, that's about believing in alignment and listening to everyone and having trust in their best of intentions. And that's a place where healing can happen. But it means we're probably going to take some time, as opposed to those areas where we want to achieve the future opportunity with focused, efficient processes and teams and tools and technology. We want to go fast. We want to achieve, and we're going to achieve that through our focused organizational areas. Maybe so that we can compete or we can have impact, and we want to leverage our knowledge and our strengths to go forward. And that usually means leaving a few people behind. And so you can see there's some tension between these virtues. We want our coaches, our therapists to be very collaborative. And we also want the champions of environmental change, the champions who are going up against climate change or going up against poverty, we want them to have impact. And we want them to have impact quickly and not take forever. And so you can see that with these 4 virtues, it's very much in tension with each other. Every virtue has tension with another virtue. The way I've heard one philosopher say this is your greatest strength can be your greatest weakness. If you are very detail-oriented and you are very quick to notice mistakes and you're very quick to see technical excellence that can be done here and there, that's your greatest strength. And yet sometimes that might be in tension with you zooming out to see the big picture about why does anyone care about that document? You just spent 2 hours correcting a document. That was your strength. But if you zoom out, it's a document nobody reads. And sometimes we need those detail-oriented people. Sometimes we need the big picture people who see lots of opportunities and they see lots of pros and cons, but they're not very good at the details. Every virtue has tension with another virtue. Greatest strength, greatest weakness. So we can take those 4 virtues and create a numerical scale. If we were to distribute 100 points across all 4 of these virtues, we could ask people, out of 100 points, where does your culture emphasize the most? In your office, in your team, in your company, in your organization. So if we were to ask, where do you spend the most amount of your energy? What do we value most in the organization? It might be that a culture starts to score most in the control category. This is where an environment where fail fast is not a good thing to say. This is where self-organization might be interpreted as violating standards. And this might be where there's a lot of processes and policies and procedures, and there's a standard operating procedure and service level agreements. There's a lot of formality so that we can stay safe, reliable, predictable. Well, if you wanted to drive an agile transformation here, we would want to focus on areas around predictable schedules. We would want to focus around a craftsmanship where the individual team members are expected to contribute to a higher level. Likewise, if we were in a culture that emphasized creativity and innovation and trying new things, experimentation, you would probably hear a lot of complaints saying that your agile process has too many meetings. It's too rigid. I have to go to all of these meetings or else I'm not a team player. And then there's no way that all of our design activity fits inside of a 2-week sprint or a 2-week iteration. And so we want to now focus our change initiative around personal empowerment. We want small MVPs, minimum viable product. We want getting ideas implemented as fast as possible. Not fully, but just a little bit. Let's try all kinds of things. This is the kind of agility that would resonate in this environment. In particular, there was a digital travel agency that I was working with that had a culture where a lot of creativity and a lot of new ideas. And this was their agile journey. Their agile journey was moving from a hyper creative environment to a place that was a little bit more stable and predictable to generate financial results. So here's a quick question in the chat window. It's time for an informal poll. In the chat window, which of these four does your culture in your office and your team emphasize the most today? What do you think of these four? Control, compete, create, collaborate. Does your team believe that more than anything else, it's best to do things right? Type control. Does your team believe that more than anything else, we need to do things fast? Type compete. More than anything else, we need to do new things, even if it means we make mistakes, even if it means it takes a little bit of time. But create. So we got we got a lot of control, a couple of controls. One compete, one create, another compete, another create. Only one collaborate so far. Interesting. Only one. There's another collaborate. This. Now somebody on their iPhone is trying to say, well, it's a little bit to collaborate and create. Well, that wasn't the poll. We were trying to make you guess just one of those. This is what you're emphasizing the most today. Okay, thank you. To MG on the iPhone, well done. The next question you might ask is, what do we need most? That's what we have today. What do you think your team, your culture needs most right now? Go ahead, type that in. If you had to choose, do you need more control, doing things right? Is there too many mistakes, too much variation? Are we going too slow? Are we having too much conflict and disagreement? Ooh, a couple of collaborates coming in. Or is one vote for everything? We need all of them. Samantha talking about we need more competitive drive to go faster. Control. Notice there's a little bit around creativity. Notice how different your answers are, ladies and gentlemen. This is all very unique to your team, your office, your organization. Amy's hoping to get more things done faster. Susie's hoping to get more things done faster. Except if they work somewhere else, it might be a different need. And if we did a survey like this, if we just asked people, which one do you most emphasize today? Which one do you, we can get a result that just measures the percentage of respondents, just like that. If we did an informal poll here, I would see that there was a lot of control in the current state and a lot of desire for compete in the future state. There'd probably be a majority number of that. Surveys make the intangible tangible. It's the basis for all of social science. So that is how you measure the soft stuff, by making it the hard stuff. That's how you would measure the culture. The next topic, we're going to do a little bit of a detour. We're going to do a little bit of a sidestep because as we're talking about the desire for more creativity or more competitive drive or more control, and we notice that there are some environments where the bias is higher and some environments where the bias is low. Some of you might be saying, Jesse, you don't understand. You're an American. You're always in the compete. You're always go, go, go. You're always in the innovation. Americans are always spending tons of money on new ideas and new products and new services. You don't understand. In my country, it's completely different. Let's talk about that. How does culture relate to country? What are those patterns of behavior? That's what we're talking about. That might show up in a work environment. And how do they relate to whether it's more compete, more control, more collaborate, or more create? My favorite instrument for understanding domestic culture comes from Hofstede Insights. There are 6 dimensions that are measured across all countries. Then based on the research. And so it's not the United Nations definition of a country. It's more of a researcher's definition, but across over 100 different countries, what is the degree of power distance from the top of the hierarchy to the lower hierarchy? How flat is our hierarchy? Individualism versus societal collectivism. How much are we about ourselves versus about our community? They use the word masculinity to describe the desire for change, which is probably not the most precise terminology, but that's one dimension, the desire for change versus the desire for status quo. Uncertainty avoidance versus an acceptance of uncertainty. Long-term orientation versus instant gratification. And indulgence versus restraint. So as you can see here, each one of these dimensions is also on a spectrum. Each one of these dimensions has an extreme on one end and on another end, just like the 4 values that we covered. So what does it look like? Well, the stereotype is that Germans are too pragmatic. Germans are always about what should be done most efficiently. And you can see in the blue columns here that for uncertainty avoidance and for long-term orientation, Germany scores higher than India and scores higher than the United States on being pragmatic. And yet, Berlin is one of the most culturally diverse, artistically experimental, musically experimental cities in the world. There's an article the New York Times posted about the resurgence of the Berlin art scene. And so sometimes the stereotype is not universal. Sometimes there's a deviation from the pattern that you would expect to see. So there is a pattern, but it's not universal. Okay, here's another one I've heard a lot in global communities. Indian employees do not upset hierarchy. Indians are very much about following the chain of command with lots of managers. And you can see that India outscores Germany and the United States in power distance and also in uncertainty avoidance. They're very much about the power distance and following the hierarchy. That fits the stereotype. And yet, here's an article about the amount of unicorns, startups that are created in India. Continues to increase. Those are the billion-dollar valuation companies that are popping up. There are more high valuation startups in India than ever before. And so you're starting to see that the stereotype, again, it's not universal. So those startups do not have a high power distance. I've worked with some teams where in Bangalore, India, I lived in Bangalore, India for 2 years, and I worked with some teams where the CEO was always arguing with his people who were always arguing with him. That was a startup. So the startup culture was more important than the survey data across an entire country. Also, Americans don't appreciate the impact they have on others. Americans are all about themselves. That's the stereotype. And the data proves it. The data says, look at this. More than Germany, more than India, Americans are about the individual self. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can be whatever you want to be. Except during the pandemic, Americans gave $500 billion to charities. So sometimes that behavioral pattern, that stereotype, isn't universal. So all this points to that your country culture does not define your company culture. Your country does not define your company. It's only one influence, it's only one factor. Yes, it's true that there are some patterns in a particular domestic culture and ethnic culture. And yes, it's true that the more diverse your country environment is, the more influences there are. But it's important to understand your specific environment. We don't want to be distracted by some of those stereotypes. We want to understand the people we have around us right here. That's why it's important to remember the immediate environment. Danielle asked the question about, doesn't that impact the PDI score? Why is it lower? Danielle, we can go back to that question a little bit later when we get to the Q&A at the end. Okay, now we have some questions. All right, Jesse, sounds good. We've got a couple of ideas here. We have the idea of culture is a collection of behaviors based on bias, okay? We talked about 4 values for which we have bias: compete, create, collaborate, control. So how do we deal with that? We have a couple of key questions here we're going to address about how can we measure that and generate insights about shaping the culture, shaping our transformation. The first one is analyze the gap. What is the gap between current state versus future state? So let's run the survey. If we run the survey and we ask, out of 100 points, what's the most emphasized value right now? And what do we want? And 100 divided by 4 means 25 is perfectly balanced. 25 points for collaborate is what we have now, but we want an even more collaborative environment, a delta of +5. We do have some creativity today of 19 points, but we want 25 points. That would be a proper balance. Where are those points going to come from? What are we going to begin to discourage so that we can encourage what we want? Well, in this case, the survey says our team members, our employees want to discourage that competitive drive a little bit. They also want to discourage the control a little bit. There's a typo here on the numbers. 29 minus 25 in control is a delta of -4. But the point is the same. That in order to encourage something more, we have to discourage something else. We have to give ourselves the space to move. We can't have everything. We have to have a balance. Analyze the gap. So we would ask this, or this is an actual chart from an organization. One organization ran their survey and it came out looking like this, where the organization wanted more creativity, the dotted line. They wanted more creativity than what they had today. In order to get that creativity and that collaboration, they would need to let go of a little bit of the control, a little bit of that competitive drive. And this became the logo. This became the logo for their internal transformation effort. So anytime there was a newsletter or a presentation or an executive briefing, this would show up to say, this is our culture transformation. This is where we're going. We're going to emphasize more collaboration and creativity, which means we're going to permit taking a little bit more time, less compete. And we're going to permit a little bit more variation and even a little bit of well-intentioned mistakes, less control. So visualize the gap. Also, we can visualize the misalignment. Culture is not about, how do I say this? The culture you have is the culture you perceive. And what you see depends on where you sit. So you can have a different culture depending on what level in the organization you are and where in the office you sit and what department you're working with. It would look something like this. Perhaps you have a Berlin office, a New York office, and a Bangalore office. And you ask them all, where do you want to change? Where do we want to go? And you can see that there's a little bit of a pattern here across the entire company in all locations. We believe we have too much control across the entire company in all locations, too much control. You can see that everybody wants to let go of control a little bit. We also agree that our collaboration is okay. Do you see that all the lines at the collaborate are about the same place? They're all at the same place here, which means that we don't want much change in the collaborative dynamic in our company across all offices. However, when it comes to control, those pragmatic Germans, they have the most work to go. Do you see the delta here in the black line from 32 to maybe 26 is the biggest gap. And it might be that our Bangalore colleagues can be role models for achieving more creativity. Look at the green line here. The green line here is for Bangalore is higher than all the other current state offices. And if everybody wants a little more creativity, Bangalore is already the most creative according to their perceptions of themselves. And so what we're visualizing here is where do we as a company have alignment? We're very collaborative and we're just the right amount of collaborative. And where do we have misalignment? Well, they're more creative and they're less creative and they need to let go of control a little bit. Well, they've let go a little bit of less of control. Visualize the misalignment. The next one, analyze the nuances. The original research for this framework came from the University of Michigan in the United States. And it came with a survey called the Culture Assessment Instrument, the Organizational Culture Assessment Instrument. And it asked 6 questions. This is the official research. And it allowed researchers to see what are the different angles of understanding these 4 virtues, these 4 values. And there were 6 different questions. One was about so let's talk about creativity. How creative are we with specific characteristics? How creative are we with our leadership? Number 3, how creative are we with our employees? Number 4, how creative are we with our connectedness? How creative are we, number 5, with our strategy, and how creative are we with our criteria for success? So if we wanted to understand how creative we are, there's 6 different angles. And what that would do is it would allow us to contrast different behaviors. So for example, the collaborate answer for strategy would be the organization emphasizes human development, high trust, openness, participation, and persist. And then for the create, there would be a different response. And then we would judge how this feels and looks differently based on the specific details. So these give us a chance to look at some nuance. And then we could graph those nuances. This came from one organization that we worked with. And what we found here was a difference in opinion between leaders and employees. The leaders are in the black and the employees are in the red. And across managing employees, question number 3, we agree we need to manage employees more creatively. Look at this. Look at the dotted line way up here in creativity relative to the solid line in creativity. Managers and leaders agree that we need way more creativity in how we manage each other, and we have very little creativity. The leaders were more exaggerated in that gap. the leaders were less confident in the creativity of the organization than the employees were. But we at least agree that we need to move. In contrast, when we talk about the criteria of success, number 6, what does success mean in our organization? The leaders today believe that the organization is all about competitive drive. Competitive drive, competitive drive. This is what the leaders are saying. And we needed to be much less about that. We need a balanced understanding of success. Strangely, the employees do not feel as much competitive pressure as the leadership does. It might be that the middle management is doing a good job of shielding the teams from that competitive pressure. But we agree, we do want to see a change. So we can visualize the nuances. We can also visualize progress. One organization we worked with ran this 3 times: the beginning of a transformation, in the middle, and at the end of year 2. Beginning, year 1, and year 2. And what you can see in the blue and the red lines are very similar. The blue and the red lines, 2019 and 2020, the lines here in the control and over here in the compete, and then over in the collaborate, all very similar lines, which means there was very little gap. And it was a very disappointing result for the transformation leaders, the coaches, the project managers. They were the change managers. They were very disappointed, even discouraged. After 1 year of culture, conversations, new processes, training, this is the only, we have like 1 or 2 points of difference. That's not very encouraging, but they kept moving forward. And then at the end of year 2, then they saw a shift. Here in the yellow line, there was a movement of being less controlling, and there was also a movement of wanting less, of needing less change. And so you can see the gap in the control area here started in 2019, the 16-point gap. 2020 was a 14-point gap, very discouraging. But then it was only a 5-point gap in 2021. And so this is an example of how you could visualize the journey over time, because culture takes time. It takes time. One other way we can discuss this is once we can visualize our culture, we can now begin to visualize why people are rejecting best practices. We know that if you have a bias in one area, you're going to interpret best practices differently. So for example, if you're all about the people, everyone is okay with that collaborative dynamic across Berlin, New York, and Bangalore, introducing a lot of change in the collaboration practices is not going to resonate. So if we were to do a happiness metric, a Nico diagram of smiley face, frowny face, smiley face, frowny face. Okay, I understand that's intended to be a little bit more collaborative and understanding of our people, but we're okay. This feels like a lot of change for no reason. Also, over here in the early stages, right now, Berlin, New York, and Bangalore have more control than they want. Empowered teams sounds really good, dotted line. We want that. But it's very foreign and frightening. Perhaps instead we start first with introducing boundaries and guidelines that clarify the transformation. We start with boundaries and guidelines of telling people what's safe harbor and unsafe harbor. We can start describing the journey through the lens of the language we understand today. So we can begin to interpret best practices through the culture that we have. And that is the framework, ladies and gentlemen. This is the competing values framework. It's a research-based framework. You can do a simple survey like we did. You could do a more technical survey like the OCAI. But the idea here is to take the intangible fuzziness of culture and make it tangible with a survey, plot the data, and visualize the tension between too much creativity versus too much competitive drive versus too much collaborative bias versus too much control. And that way we can have a conversation about driving transformation. That's what we had in store for today. We talked about the challenge. Why is this so hard? We talked about the framework. We took a little bit of a detour that your country culture does not define your company culture. It's only one influence. And then we saw some examples of how we could use the framework to visualize and measure the misalignment, visualize and measure the gap, visualize and measure progress. Here's what's next. You need to do something. Knowledge is great. Presentation was fun. Thank you, Jesse. I love your energy. But that's not going to change your workplace. If you want a workplace that has the collaboration you want, that you mentioned in the chat window, the creativity you want in the chat window, if you want that, then starting today, maybe I'll let you wait until tomorrow. Start a conversation. Share these materials. Share these slides. I'll tell you in a moment how to get the slides. With a coworker and say, what's the future state that we want? Even if it's just a little bit of a change towards a little bit more collaboration, or a little bit of a change to let go of some of our controlling impulses. You could run an informal survey with just your team, either using the simple poll or using the more advanced query. And you can always get help from a mentor. You could reach out to me. I'll share with my contact information if you have questions about this. So here's how to get access to those materials for you to take the slides, use the slides, have a conversation, run your own survey, scan the QR code here using your phone. And if you scan that, send your email address and we will email you those slides right away. Also, if you want to understand more about encouraging change in your workplace so that you can yield the culture you want, I'm hosting a cohort starting this coming August about encouraging a growth mindset in yourself and encouraging a growth mindset in the people around you so that you can drive positive change. The slides will come with information on that program as well. That's what I wanted to share with you today. We have some time now for some Q&A. Katrina, what questions do people have?
I think Daniela has some questions. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I was asking when you were talking about power distance and individualism and how the states are high on individualism. I literally was just reading Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers on this section, and he was talking about, yeah, so good. Individualism and how that actually derives our power distance to be lower because we don't that equality, we view everyone as equal. We're willing to challenge up, I guess. So I was curious, like, can you speak to that or your thoughts on it?
Well, let's hold on, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go back in time. Here we go. Here's the power distance and the individualism. The United States there is in green. And so I see your point that the higher individualism, 91 points, corresponds to low power distance at 40. that I could, that doesn't happen in the Netherlands, for example. One of the things I remember contrasting the United States versus Netherlands scores also very low in power distance. I remember a story of one of my Dutch colleagues telling me that he and his manager got into a big argument about strategy. No, it got loud. No. And then afterwards they went for a pint. And so there is a low power distance in that scenario, and yet the individualism in Holland does not score nearly as high as the United States. So there might be a correlation, but it's not linear. It's not direct. So there are those scenarios where you can have a low power distance and a little bit of collectivism as well at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. I didn't think about countries in the Netherlands where community is so focused.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
I'm going to add in the chat window the link to the slides if you are interested. Other thoughts, questions? What comes up for people as they think about how they might foster a conversation?
Well, I have a question for you, Jesse, which strikes me as the founder of a small team. Could you tell me, what do you think the minimum team size that will make sense to run those surveys and to bridge that gap?
The minimum team size for performing the survey?
For going through this process and to trying to capture the metrics that we will improve later on.
I can tell you a story about my startup. I ran this survey for my team. There were about a half a dozen of us. There were about 6 people. And when we did the survey, we distinguished between leadership and everyone else. And the leadership was myself as the co-founder and the director of operations. And then there was everyone else, which included our finance person, it included our marketing person, and included our team Scrum Master facilitator. And what was interesting is that even with just a few data points, we found that the 2 leaders of our small team were very much on the same page about create, collaborate, compete, control. And the rest of the team was also very much on the same page. But we were very different as groups. And in particular, what was interesting is, all right, so let me just kind of, how do I describe this? I don't have these, I could find them for us, but the lines for the team members, the dotted lines and the solid lines were all the same, which means they didn't want any change. They were very happy. They didn't want to go far. They didn't want to be more collaborative or more controlling or more creative. They really enjoyed working on the team as is. This culture is just like there was a little bit of more points in the upper half, or a few more points on the upper half than the lower half. But then myself and our director of operations, we were both way in the compete. We need to do more. We need to innovate more. We need more clients. We need more products. Come on, let's go. and the rest of the team is happy, they're just like, ooh, chill out, Jesse. This is a good job. I like working for you. It's time for lunch. I mean, they just enjoyed it. Was the right balance for them. And so that was a wake-up call for me to ask myself if I was enjoying the team that we had built as much as I could, as much as I should enjoy it, instead of always worrying about the future. And as a founder, as an entrepreneur, that tends to be our role, was we worry about the future.
Right. Thank you. Any more questions, folks?
I was wondering, hi Jesse, how you doing? I was wondering if Jesse looks like he froze. Is he still there?
I don't know, but for me, it's the same.
Yeah, it looks like he froze. So
Let me send him a message on LinkedIn.
I think he logged off.
Maybe because we didn't ask more questions.
Maybe.
No, I think it's a new Zoom. I've got this also today 1 or 2 times. I was just out of Zoom and then I got back. So I think we should wait. I hope you come back.
Okay, I've just sent him a message on LinkedIn. Let's see.
Session was scheduled for another half hour. So yeah, maybe come back on. There he is. Oh, whoop.
1 second.
Ah,
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is now Samantha. My internet is out, but my teammate was joining us and was it. Thank you. My teammate was joining us on her mobile hotspot. So I am still available to hang out for a little bit.
I had a question, Jesse. How are you, by the way? Good to see you. I was wondering what your thoughts are on some of the discussion that's happening in the Agile space in general about the practice of Agile, about transformations and how they're failing, and Agile is kind of losing its shiny new appearance to people as a benefit. Just wondering what you're hearing on the street about that. Are people thinking they're going to abandon Agile or?
So let's answer this question through the lens of the 4 culture values that we were discussing today. Yes, there is absolutely a shift happening right now in the conversation around what agility means. It's been a conversation that's been happening now for a quarter century. So it makes sense that the conversation is due for some new language, some new ideas. One consideration is that with each new leader that comes in, there's a new interpretation. Agile means creativity because I'm a creative leader and I want more creativity. And so let's do more MVPs. Let's do an innovation funnel. And then the next leader comes in and says, no, Agile, if that's what Agile is bad. Then we need to be standard operating procedure, predictable schedules. We need much more control in this organization. And so we're going to introduce fixed cadence of quarterly planning, which sounds like release planning. We need stable teams where we don't move people around and we know exactly who the rosters are. That sounds very agile to me. And then the next leader comes in and said, no. This organization needs much more of a people focus. We need to be a family. We need to encourage growth and opportunity. And those rules are a little bit too rigid. And that creativity is a little bit too frightening. And so we need lots of working agreements. We need to have long conversations about roles and responsibilities and how we can maybe rotate people's assignments to give them a chance to expand. And so I think what we're at as now that we've gone through the pandemic, and the tech industry is going through a major correction, there's a real set of questions people are asking about what do we need in this organization? And the challenge for a lot of people is it really depends on the leader you have, because they're ultimately accountable for success as defined by their boss. And if it's a CEO, their boss is the board. And if it's the board, their bosses are the shareholders. And so I would encourage everyone to say that your vision of good is not dead. Rather, your vision of good may not yet be well enough described. So now we can use these 4 virtues. You could download these slides. You could look into the competing values framework. There's some good YouTube videos, and that'll give you some language to describe that what this organization needs is to just let go of the control quadrant a little bit, start embracing a little bit more of the other 3, more collaborate, a little more creativity, a little bit more competitive drive. And now you're using words that are not management buzzwords. They're not agile buzzwords. The buzzwords are starting to get a little stale. Nobody cares about burn down charts anymore. Nobody cares about user stories anymore. But what is eternal, what will outlive any fad and outlive any leader, is using language like this.
Thank you. Always. Thank you for the insight.
Yeah, so to the point that was made, we do have a little more time to play around. So other thoughts, ideas, or if we're done, we can be done.
Well, I have another question, since we have more time. So what do you think? Should we follow people response for change, or is there a space for executives to set that goal for that gap?
Is there space? Should we change the words we use, or?
No. Let me phrase it in a different way. So as you showed different example where the company is right now and where employees want to be in the future, the dotted line, I'm wondering, should the company follow directly to that particular point based on employees' requests, or should the company aim to be somewhere where executives think it should be?
Okay, so I don't have the. Go back to my Zoom meeting. I don't have the slides to visualize this, but Alexey's asking, his question is, we visualize the gap between our current state and the desired state. We visualize the misalignment where the leaders want to go here, but the employees want to go here. And so I think, Alexey, you're asking who wins?
Right.
Yeah. Who do we listen to? Do we listen to the employees who want to go here? Do we listen to the leaders who want to go here? And we don't know the answer to that. until we have a conversation. So one of the powerful points of using this framework is we now have data that measures the misalignment. And we now can discuss the misalignment objectively. So as opposed to, you just don't like where I want to take the organization, says the leader. Or you're just being lazy. And it's in particular, it's Amy's the problem. So they might pick on one in particular person. And now we have data that says, actually, it's not just Amy, it's everyone who disagrees with you. And now that reveals either it's the poorly communicated strategy and direction, the leadership has not made a compelling case to the staff, or the staff are just not ready. I ran this survey with a school district, the leadership team at a school district, and it revealed exactly this tension, that the leadership were saying that we need much more competitive drive, we need more innovation, we need to go faster, and all of the staff who are lifetime local government employees, they chose this career for stability, they chose this career for reliability, and they wanted very much to go much more towards the collaborate and control. And it revealed the fact that they were not ready for the new reality. In a school district, post-COVID, hybrid learning is the new normal. And this was not what they had expected when they chose this career 15 years ago. And so the entire reality of my career has shifted right from under me. I'm not ready for this change. So now the leaders need to think about, how do we prepare our staff, which maybe they forgot to. Maybe they were only thinking about the roadmap for innovation, the roadmap for new projects, the roadmap for the portfolio, and wow, our staff are not even ready to implement this. So sometimes it's a blend where the leaders need to slow down, and sometimes the staff need to step up. So it's really about having the conversation about, why do we have this gap and what's underneath of it. Alexey, does
Jesse,
that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Jesse, I shared a screenshot of your next step slides where you say, run the survey to calm drama with data. Like, that is huge, right? Use that data to get everyone calmed down.
Yeah, it's not about personal agendas if there's a pattern.
Yeah.
There was a recent story. This happened this week, where a colleague of mine turned in her resignation because she was moving into a new job, and she was concerned about how her boss would take the news, and he said, oh wow, that sounds fantastic, that sounds like a great opportunity, I'm so excited for you. And then when it was time to announce to the rest of the team, he's like, so Susan here has some really good news. I'm like, this is not how you share the news that a team member is leaving. And so perhaps there was a pattern here of this manager feeling overwhelmed, feeling a little bit ill-equipped to handle the team. And there was just one person that tapped into that pattern. You never know what's going on in the culture until you have data. Thanks for sharing that. I have another resource here. So in the category of using different words to describe the same things, there is a post, here it is. Let me just go here, copy this. In the chat window is a link to my website that will give you a chance to get the slides. So I encourage you to click on that link and get the slides. And if you're interested in a way to use different language to describe the same best practices, here we go. Here's an article I wrote years ago about describing agility without using any buzzwords.
Nice.
And you can start seeing that in this article. There's another example of using common language to describe, do we need more creativity, more collaboration, more competitive drive? What do we need?
And I'm wondering, did you witness some tangible results in companies where that gap was breached?
One of the tangible results from the organization that tracked its progress year over year, the 2019 to 2020, very little change, 2020 to 21, meaningful change. One of the things that happened that correlated to the change in the culture, many people left. There was a change at the CIO level. There was a change in the PMO. There was a change in a number of the mid managers who, and I think all of them would say, that's not the Agile that I wanted. This transformation happened. It wasn't going in the direction I wanted. I had to leave. So that interprets, or that one thing, one correlation, a culture change correlates with a people change. Because our culture is comprised of people and their bias and their preferences and their visions and their opinions. And if the change is not moving in the direction that I want it to go, I will probably go somewhere else. So as far as like the results that you're referring to, it could be argued that, well, so that was one impact. Number one, a culture change correlates to a people change. The question I'm realizing you actually asked was, did that result in a bottom line impact?
Right.
And I can tell you that there are new lines of business that exist today that did not exist 5 years ago. There is revenue growth that's happening. Whether that happened as a direct cause of the culture change and the new portfolio is arguable, but the company is thriving 5 years after it started this initiative. So that brings up Lori's point number 3. So a people change correlates to a culture change. Number 2, bottom line results and impact are hard to directly attribute to specific transformations. But number 3, what usually is the conversation I'm hearing now, to Lori's point, is that what we're calling agile practices or a product-centric approach to doing work, or any of these kinds of transformations is quickly becoming a prerequisite for growth and market share and customer satisfaction, and not a differentiator.
Do you find, Jesse, also that some of the language, you alluded to this earlier, but I'm gonna kind of step out there and say, I think people are finding that those old buzzwords are now no longer resonating. So they're finding different words to use to bring about the same outcomes. They don't want to use the word agile, so maybe they're using something else. Like you're familiar with my organization situation, and I've been here for over 3 years trying to bring agile in. I had to be very careful and very under the covers about it. It was all kind of done in in a groundswell kind of way where, you know, onesie, twosie teams would be adopting and then they would talk about it and other people would be like, that looks really good. Well, now we're into the whole business agility, the operational model, right? So now leadership is paying attention, but business agility is essentially a greater funnel for agile, right? The mindset's there. It's all the same, right?
Sometimes what will get you going is if you introduce completely different practices that are intended to drive the same cultural
Behaviors.
energy. For example, for a long time, everyone was talking about product backlogs and a portfolio Kanban and having product goals. And that was a hot topic. There were even frameworks for, the product canvas. Product canvas was hugely popular for a business model canvas, hugely popular for a solid 10 years. And then about, I'm going to say 5 years ago, Google's OKRs took over the scene. It's the same intent. The same intent is to create more measurable momentum about what are we doing and where are we going, alignment across the organization, whether you're using this tool or that tool. It's a different tool with a different term with the same intent.
Yes.
So you're right.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm seeing that with diversity, equity, and inclusion too. Nobody wants to say DEI anymore. They're using different words like culture work. It's the same idea. We still need it.
Yeah, fortunately for project management, product management, it's a little bit less controversial than some other topics. Like DEI has been annoyingly perceived as a controversial thing.
I know. It's sad, really, but
Neither, yeah. Well, I'm appreciative of everybody just sticking around for the full session. I can't believe people would subject themselves to 90 minutes of me rambling, but I'm grateful. Again, look me up on LinkedIn. I am looking forward to seeing invites from all of you. And it's good to see familiar faces as well. And I am hoping that if you want to capture the slides, please do click on the link in the chat window and submit your give me your info so I can send those slides to you. Yes, Amy, thank you. Alexey, thank you. Katrina and Standuply for organizing this. Their efforts to create a community of forward-thinking practitioners is appreciated, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to hang out with everybody.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure for us, and I'm happy that so many people joined and stayed until the end of this talk, which means it makes a lot of sense for everyone. I'm happy to be a part of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jesse.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, everybody, have a great week.
Yeah.
And don't quit. Keep up the fight. Create the work environment you want, because nobody else will.
Right. Jesse, can you stay like just for 1 minute to wrap up with me and Katrina?
Yeah.
Katrina, now you can switch off the record, stop the record.